Hi, my name is Adam Stern. I'm CEO of Strata SFR. We're going to be changing the name of our podcast from Welcome to the Off Market to Inside SFR. As much as Strata SFR is an off-market specialty company, we are all about the single-family rental industry, particularly the institutional single-family rental industry that focuses on build for rent and scatter site single-family portfolios. And we just felt like the name Inside SFR more closely reflects really who we are. We're insiders in this very large and getting larger industry, and we'd like you to see this industry through the prism of us, what we know, our experience, and our insights. Hi everybody, this is Adam Stern, CEO of Strata SFR. Welcome to my podcast, Inside SFR. Today we're talking with an interesting guest, someone that is in a segment that I've always wanted to learn a little bit more about, modular home manufacturing, modular building manufacturing. We're going to be bringing on Clint Holcomb. He runs a firm called Techome Manufacturing out of Nashville. I met him at the last IMN conference, and he described the fact that he built a large modular home, modular building manufacturing plant in Nashville to the tune of $30 million. So a massive facility that manufactures all kinds of buildings, including single-family homes. I had talked to him about the build for rent segment and what modular could mean for build for rent. Clint, thanks for joining us today.
How you doing?
Doing good. So can you explain what modular manufacturing is all about for a layperson like me who doesn't really understand anything about it?
Yeah, I guess the simplest way in a nutshell is we start kind of with the design process, right? So we like to get involved. We're not architects, but we like to be involved, and an architecture firm who knows modular involved early on in the process so that the home can be designed specifically to be built modular, right? So you think about modular and you think about boxes, and if you go and take a lot of times, if you take an architect who isn't familiar with modular, you get a boxy looking, building and product. But when you take someone who is familiar with modular, they know how those boxes can be stacked and work together and come from the design element, you end up having a home that is designed to be built in these boxes that then, right, conceptually is taken apart into these boxes to be built in the factory. And then we build pretty much 90% of the vertical construction right in the factory. So we do the framing, the electrical, the plumbing, the HVAC. We put in the cabinets, the countertops, the tile tub surrounds, the tile backsplash, the flooring, the paint. A lot of people, ask me, well, when it comes, what do I have to do? And they're kind of surprised when they find out you open the door, you walk in, and pretty much, it's ready to move in. Well, you do ship with the appliances in a lot of cases as well. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
So that's interesting. I come from the perspective of someone that's very involved in the single family rental build for rent segment, right? So, thinking about it from the perspective of an investor that's looking to build for rent, a lot of times what they're doing is they're buying entitled land and they're using a general contractor to push dirt around and create the lots on that land. They'll come to a point where the lots are ready to build vertically, at which point they'll usually go to a home builder, and that home builder will have certain product types and front elevations and floor plans and spec levels that they can build these homes to. So would a build for rent investor come to you instead of a home builder, where you would do all the above, and instead of building it on the site, you would essentially build and architect their home in your modular plant? Do you more or less supplant the role of a home builder in the building process?
So this works in a variety of capacities. The easiest way to explain it is I like to take a potential customer and kind of walk them through the process, kind of work with them to understand modular and really get them to a point of mentally understanding the benefits of modular and saying, I don't want to do a one-off project. I want to make this a part of my arsenal, right? The answer to that question is it depends on the developer, the builder, the GC. We like to plug into your team and be a part of your team, right? Mm-hmm. And essentially take, these 9 or 10 subcontractors and eliminate the hassle of no longer having to use them, right? So we don't really like to be a GC. We like to work with the GC or with the builder or with the developer who self-performs,
right?
As opposed to us being the GC. And so part of the process is, us bringing pieces to the table that help you orientate kind of a realignment of the team, right? So you take your existing team and, in development, it's so much about the team, right? More than any other business, in my experience. I run a few other companies. And in development, you're really reliant on your lawyer and your architect and your contractor and your subcontractors and, your capital stacks. You have all these different aspects to your team. What we try to do is come in and make what is the most hassle, the most headache, which is really the vertical construction, right? And so what kind of got me into modular was looking at the hassle and saying, man, like we need a solution to this. Really, from not just single family homes, SFR, but also multifamily, modular is a great solution for the labor crunch that we're dealing with, the lack of certainty. I always say we give people certainty of time, certainty of price. So, some people come to me and are like, I need a GC. And I'm like, what I'd rather do is find you a local GC. I'd rather help build a relationship with you, me, and that GC. So we all work on the same page. And then we'll do 90% of the vertical construction in the factory. And we'll be an integral part of your team, right? And we'll help you do more projects faster because we can bring your projects to completion faster, right? The benefit we bring isn't construction management. The benefit we bring is taking all those little subcontractors, that's where your hassle is. Your hassle usually isn't in dealing with your GC. Your hassle is usually in your GC dealing with your drywaller, your plumber, your electrician, and they're the ones who don't show up, right? I can't pick up $30 million worth of investment and move it to a new job site overnight. They can pick up $3,000 worth of tools, load it in the back of a truck, and be gone because someone had offered them 30 cents more a square foot or a $10,000 bonus for pulling off your job. And your GC kind of shields you from all of that. Generally, if you're not a self-performing developer, you're kind of screaming at your GC like, why aren't you on my site? Why are we taking longer? And your GC is dealing with the back end and kind of shielding you from, hey, this guy basically hit us up with, give me an extra $10,000 this week, or I'll be back next week. And I don't really have much of a choice, right? We don't ever do that to somebody, right? And that's where we talk about certainty of time, certainty of price. So rather than focus on us being the GC and trying to do all these other things, we prefer to focus on solving the biggest headache, which is all of those little subcontractors that create all your delays, right? Your plumber doesn't show up. Well, that pushes everything back. And if you push back your drywaller, by the time you need him, he might be on another job and he's gonna be like, well, now I got to finish this job unless you're going to pay me more. So it's a domino effect, right? In our factory setting, we don't have that domino effect. They all work in-house for us hourly. And so it keeps that consistency. And we're able to then give kind of a certainty of time and certainty of price where, you don't usually have your hourly employees come in and be like, hey, look, if you don't give me an extra this much, I'm going to be working on this job next week. It just doesn't happen for us. And so rather than try to be all things, we try to be one thing and do it really well. And so each developer, builder, GC, they have their own approach. They have their own systems. They have their own teams. And there are some aspects of those teams that we come in and work with, and some aspects they need to find some new team members. And we help with that, right? We help with finding and placing them with a modular architecture firm, the set crew, the shipping, and we kind of bring all of those pieces so that it can be kind of a cohesive unit. We have architecture firms we'd like to work with because we have set crews, shipping companies that we work with regularly that we like to work with. So we bring all of those pieces. Not all modular factories do that, by the way. If you're lucky enough to get in with a modular factory, some of them, because there's so much demand, just like in any aspect of construction, just kind of dump that all on the customer, which obviously is not preferential for the customer.
So Clint, give me a crash course in modular. I'm pretty familiar with the regular way of building a house, which most people generally describe as stick-built houses, on-site houses. So give me a sense of what modular offers and what it is versus stick-built houses, just at a high level.
So for me, a crash course in modular has a little bit of history to it, right? So in 1908, Sears Roebuck, they had a catalog, a print catalog, and you could buy a home from their catalog and they would ship it to you, and it was like a kit home. And that was like, in a lot of ways, people consider that like the start of prefabrication modular. That led into companies building mobile homes because that was the next logical evolution.
I heard about this. You could actually buy a home via the Sears catalog. They would essentially truck it in pieces to location, and it would be up to you to build it, essentially, right?
Absolutely, yep. And that was kind of how it started. That evolved into manufactured housing, or what we call mobile homes, right?
That's what I think about. When I think about modular homes, I kind of put mobile homes and modular homes in the same place in my mind, which is a little bit of a misnomer because they're not all modular homes, right? So yeah, I think it's got a bad rap almost. It's got a stigma to it.
It's kind of made me an educator, right? As much as I'm running a business, I'm also an educator because I deal with this a lot with people having this confusion. They're like, well, we don't build modular. I'm like, you don't build regular standard stick-built homes? Like, well, we do. And I'm like, okay, let me explain to you. That's why I said a history is important. A lot of people get confused between manufactured, and the biggest way to know the difference is manufactured comes on a metal frame. It comes on wheels. It's usually registered with the DMV because it's considered personal property, chattel, as opposed to, right, well, we build modular or stick-built. Those are the same thing. And those are considered real property. They permanently run with the land. They're permanently affixed to the land. They don't come on wheels. And so that's like the first thing that people have to understand is there's a distinct difference between those two product types.
This is almost news to me. Like, I considered stick-built and modular two different things. You're saying stick-built and modular are kind of the same thing. On the opposite side of the spectrum, you have manufactured, which is what most people would consider mobile homes. Mobile homes, manufactured homes, it's the same thing. That's when it's not affixed to the land. You got to actually get it, registered as a vehicle, as opposed to modular and stick-built. So draw a distinction. To me, stick-built means you bring wood or steel or material to the site and you put it together on the site. It's generally not put together yet. Your trade bases do that. You got your plumber doing the plumbing, electrician doing the electric, you got the framers doing the framework. Stick built, to my mind, is different than modular, where you're doing all of this in a factory. Do I have that wrong?
It's like, how high level do you go, right? I think you go high level to temporary housing, which is more like mobile homes and other forms of temporary housing, and then permanent housing, which is stick-built or modular, right? So then you delineate those a little bit more. So when you take a stick-built home, right, you have components. A window is a component. If you go back, when I started, 20 years ago, I was remodeling old homes in Buffalo, New York. These are 100-plus-year-old homes, and you see how they built windows on these homes, and they were built on site. It was crazy. And then we started taking windows and building them off-site and building windows as a component of the building structure. And then we started doing pre-hung doors. So kind of back in the day, they used to just take trees on the property, they'd fell them, they'd mill them, and they'd build a house. And then we started doing more and more of it as components, right? So in our heads, it's easier to look at modular as a component of a building. We're going to bring all of these individual components that you assemble on site, we're going to assemble them off site, then we're going to bring boxes as components and put them together on site. So kind of think about it that way might help people. What we like to do as humans is we like to compartmentalize things and say, where does this fit? And modular fits outside of our understanding. We don't have a place to put it, right? For some people, it helps to put it as a building component. It's just a more complete building component. When it comes, is this box, this component comes, it comes with all those other components in it, your carpet or your LVP and your cabinets. But they used to build kitchen cabinets on site right into the property. Now they build them off site and then they ship them to site and put them together. We take all those components, we ship them to the factory, put them all together, and then give you an even more complete component.
You're right. We do compartmentalize things in our head, and I'm the king of doing that because I can't understand anything unless I compartmentalize it and put it in a frame of reference that I can understand.
Yeah. This is part of the reason that I love being out there in the different circles, more than a lot of modular manufacturers do. A lot of modular manufacturer owners are just making money, and that's their business. But to me, I see an evolution in the industry coming over the next decade. And so kind of to answer that question, right? Could you still build windows on site today like they used to build 100 years ago? You could still have someone come and plane the wood and order glass and glaze it on site. It just costs you more to do that, and you get a lower quality product, right? Today, I strongly feel that modular is a higher quality product. We use significantly more wood in our product. The disadvantage to modular today is that we're not giving you a price reduction. It's generally on par, right? So some people say, oh, is it cheaper? It's not cheaper, but there are other ways that make it cheaper or better, right? Other benefits. But in the future, when we look 10 years from now, I'm pretty certain that modular is going to be cheaper, right? Windows didn't go from on-site to off-site and they were instantly cheaper. There was like a lag period where like, oh, it's more expensive or the same price to build windows off-site. We'll go with the old way, the craftsman, because that's that higher quality personal touch, right? And we're seeing like the entire building envelope going through this transition over the next 10 years. And this started 10 years ago. It takes time to transition a product that complex. But we're seeing that transition happen right in front of our very eyes, right? We call it, in my world, prefabrication. So people have heard of all sorts of other things, panelized systems and SIP systems and this and that. But at the end of the day, what you really want, as you talk about pain points, is you want a product that comes as complete as possible from the factory to your site. Yeah. And that's what modular is. We bring as much of that product, we call it 90% of vertical construction, completed to your site. But one of the challenges that we deal with in the industry is we're dealing with products that were built for on-site construction, and we're having to make those products work in an off-site model. Mark my words, in 10 years, that won't be the case. In 10 years, there will be products that, and they're being designed now, but in 10 years, it'll be normal to have products that are built for my factory that make it more efficient. Why am I dealing with 4x8 sheets of OSB? I can get larger sheets, but they're not common, etc. But as factories become more common, we'll have larger sheets of OSB, right? In theory, I could throw down, let's say you have a box that's 70 feet long and 13 feet wide. We frame that whole floor, right, on a floor table. Why can't I have one 70-foot by 13-foot sheet of OSB that's dropped on there. Why are we doing 4x8 sheets? The time is coming, and those building components are going to change, and that's going to begin to lower the cost of factory production. But today, we generally say that the efficiencies that we gain in a factory are lost in other areas, shipping, setting, etc.
Like transportation, I'd imagine that'd be the case.
Right, but those are more manageable pain points, right? This is the interesting thing, right? To answer your question, the pain points are more manageable with you have some transportation, some setting, than trying to manage your plumber, your electrician, your framer, your drywaller on site, dealing with the elements. So we eliminate dealing with the elements. We eliminate dealing with all of these subcontractors who don't show up or change their prices whenever they want, or they can't get enough labor, etc. So when you talk about pain points and dealing with them, it's the elimination of those on-site pain points. It's the elimination of the uncertainty of when is my project going to be complete? I don't know. Sometime in 2023. When? I don't know. Here's a 5-month window. We'll figure it out. Right. But when we tell you we're going to deliver your product in July of 2023, it comes in July of 2023, usually within days of the agreed upon delivery time frame. And so that's kind of like how you manage those pain points of, I don't know when my project's going to be complete. I don't know when my subs are going to show up. We take that hassle away.
It seemed to me kind of before we had this conversation, you would be in direct competition with builders. People would have, the option of going to a builder, building a home the old-fashioned way, which, it has them GCing it, them with all their subs, and then them with all their tradesmen. But now that I hear you say that, you could almost consider a builder as a potential client for you, right? So the builder is hired to build out a subdivision. They need to buy the materials, hire the subs, hire the tradesmen. And what you're essentially doing is not supplanting the builder, you're kind of substituting yourself in place of the subcontractors that they would use to get the homes built. You're not competing with the home builder, but you're kind of a plan B for the home builder. If they don't want to go the old-fashioned route of doing all the above, you could provide a way for them to essentially build all this in a factory, and what they would be in charge of is essentially putting those things together on site after they're built in the factory.
Yeah, when we looked at building our factory, there's a few different models. A lot of people are familiar with what's called a dealer network model, which is where you build single family homes and you build all these dealer networks and you sell them to the dealer networks, and then those dealers are kind of like builders. And so they'll build the home for the customer in a subdivision on a builder's land. And that model, I call that the old model, right? Talking about history again and where the industry is going. The new model, and it's not just me, there's other factories that are being built right now. There's about 10 around the country. Most of them are already sold out. You never hear about these factories. They're already sold out. They're already working with builder developers. Our factory, because we're expanding, it has a lot more capacity, which is why I'm trying to be out there to fill up that capacity. But a lot of the factories are smaller. They're 300 to 400,000 square feet a year of capacity. And so they're working directly with builders, developers, and GCs, and that is the new model, right? That was what we built our factory for, was specifically for that purpose. Our competition really is the subcontractors, and they can never really compete with us because they're never going to pull together, tens of millions of dollars. And the reality is we're not necessarily going to put them out of business either, because there's a shortage, right? There's a shortage of these subcontractors. So this is why I liked the model when I started getting into it and building a factory a few years ago. I realized that my direct competition was simply other factories. And all of those other factories are also booked out 12 to 18 months. Most of them aren't even taking on new customers right now. So I was like, I'm going into a business where you have to have specialized knowledge, specialized experience. There's very little competition and there's a need for it. And to your point, the customer isn't, the competitor isn't the builder. It's not the GC. Because what we would prefer to do is plug into the builder or plug into the GC and let them manage the customer relationship, the end user customer relationship. Think about it like if Tesla had decided and said, we're not going to build and sell our cars to companies directly. We're going to go and say, you know what, Ford, rather than you figure out how to make electric vehicles, why don't you go ahead and take our vehicle and slap Ford on the front of it? Right. And Ford would be like, well, we could go and build a plant to make electric vehicles, but you could. Or you can just take a system that's really good and you can sell our electric vehicles and call it a Ford. We don't really care because we don't want to deal with your customer.
Or in that example, like I'd imagine a home builder that had certain kinds of homes and floor plans in their catalog, and they might think, all right, it usually costs me $350,000 all in to build this plan. Let me talk to Clint and see what Techome Modular can provide. So like, here's what it'll cost me to build my usual home the usual way, $350,000. And I might talk to you and you might say, it still costs $350,000, but here's all the hassle that you'll eliminate. You won't have to use these tradesmen or these subcontractors. You can essentially do it with the people that are in your company. We'll send you the finished product that we build in our factory, and they would essentially be assembling it on site, essentially. I always thought, I think about modular, I think about cheaper right away. And from what you're telling me is, right now, it's not always necessarily cheaper. What you're really doing is eliminating some of the inefficiencies of the home building process.
Yeah, and there's some other benefits, right? So we like to work with builders who are building build-to-rent communities. We love that because we like to get a large volume order at once. But looking forward, today we're in a very hot housing market, and so modular for speed of construction makes sense. But it really makes sense even in a not hot housing market. For instance, let's say 10 years from now, the market's not on fire. But is there ever a customer who wants to wait 9 to 12 months for their home to be built? Does that customer really exist? He was like, yeah, that's great. I've got 9 months to wait for my home. A lot of times builders are losing customers in down housing markets because of the time it takes. A customer may be able to afford it, but they say, I can go and buy this house, which isn't my dream home, but I can move in a month, as opposed to waiting for you 9 to 12 months to build me a home. With modular, you can cut that time frame way down. So the benefit in a hot housing market is you can put more product online faster. The benefit in a market that isn't as hot is that you can deliver to your customers and maybe convert potential customers into customers because they don't have to wait 9 to 12 months for their home to be built. It can be done in 3 to 6 months. Much faster, much more manageable time frame for most individuals who are looking for a home. So this is like your single family rental. But when you look at a single family homeowner, when you're looking at rental properties, it allows you to realize revenue anywhere between 3 to 15 months sooner, kind of depending on your model. In multifamily or hotels, we're completing projects 9 to 15 months sooner. In single family, that's 3 to 12 months, kind of depending on your model, right? So it's not just, hey, we're eliminating the hassle, but it's getting your product online faster and being able to knock out future uncertainty, right? Whether it's sales price uncertainty, whether it's economic uncertainty, whether it's rental price uncertainty, it's realizing that revenue faster, right? In business, we're always trying to increase our IRR, our internal rate of return. And so the faster in development we get a product up and rented or sold, the faster we return that capital and the higher our IRR is. And so that is a huge benefit to modular. And so what it requires is kind of developers understanding that and then beginning to build new kind of models, new Excel spreadsheets around kind of that new model of, hey, if my product is coming to market faster, what does model A, modular, look like compared to model B, which is stick built? And that's not just an apples to apples comparison on price. You now have to bring in the factor of, I'm getting done this much sooner. So if I'm able to get my profit this much sooner, so even let's hypothetically take an example, the extreme, where you say, well, what if modular cost me $10 more a square foot? Well, then it's just a non-starter. Is it a non-starter if I'm able to sell my product in half the time, or I'm able to lease it in half the time? So you have a lot of variables that people aren't used to assessing when it comes to modular versus kind of the more traditional stick-built method.
So Clint, you just talked about uncertainty and the time factor. And that's a big part of the challenge of building houses. The longer it takes to build a subdivision, the more chances that you have that the prices of materials and the prices of labor will fluctuate. My question is, if you take modular and you compare it to on-site built homes, what are some of the things that make the time more assured and the cost more assured versus the way that builders generally build homes, which is on site?
It's a hard question to ask because we're not used to asking it, and it's a hard thing to quantify because it's a complex question, right? As homes are complex. I think sometimes seeing is believing. Hold on, I'm going to share this visual, and you can tell me if this answers the question better. So first, there's fabrication, right? You have the factory fabrication, and so that becomes relevant when you go down to the time frame, and this is kind of how we explain it a lot of times. You have your modular versus traditional timeline. And so when you have your designing, engineering, permits approval, that kind of all follows the same timeline. That's kind of normal. But then you go into your site prep and foundation work. So in a traditional kind of construction method, you do your site prep and foundation work, and it's very linear. Then you go to your vertical construction, and then you go to your move-in. But with modular, we're able to do the vertical construction in the factory at the same time as the site prep and foundation work is going on. And that is what results in the time savings. That's what results in a higher IRR, faster lease up, faster sale. Because while the foundations are curing, we're already doing vertical construction. That's the huge benefit to modular. And that's why I believe that modulars continue to take market share in the future.
So that's interesting to me, because from the minute an investor closes on an entitled piece of land, they start horizontal construction. And they generally can't start vertical construction until they complete that lot, right? So it makes a lot of sense to me, in relation to modular, where from the minute I close on a piece of land, from the very first day that I start pushing dirt around, feasibly I could start building my house at the same time. So the very minute I get done with the lot, I've got materials waiting there that I already have assembled that I just have to put on the site, which I'd imagine is a massive time saver. I'm almost thinking why everyone doesn't do that. And it kind of goes to your point that you just talked about, where it kind of goes to your point that we might look back in 10 years and think, why would we ever build it all on site when we could build it in a factory and ship it there? Why do you think it's taking so long with the technology we have nowadays to get to this point? It would almost seem like the minute we figured out how to build things in factories and ship it to the site, everyone would do it that way. So why isn't it being done on a larger scale than it is today?
That's a complex question. I'll give you a couple of my rationales in a nutshell. So a few things. I think that the advent of design becoming I think we went through a period in our culture where design was kind of like a forethought. So if you look at the early 1900s, kind of before World War I or around that time, we were very wealthy and design became a huge thing. You look at Frank Lloyd Wright, right? Coming from Buffalo, we had all of these different design elements and just beautiful, but that was the wealthiest city in the country at the turn of the 19th century. And so you saw this explosion of design, and we went to World War I, World War II, and after World War II, it was kind of a building boom. It was a technology focus. You had refrigerators. They were ugly. They weren't good looking. You had cars that were ugly. You had houses that were ugly.
People just wanted them. It didn't matter that they were pretty. People just wanted a refrigerator. They wanted a car. They wanted a house to live in, and they didn't really worry about it looking good until, I'm guessing, that shifted. Keep going.
So then you go into kind of like the advent of Steve Jobs comes on the scene and says, why is a computer that's just functional, why can't it look good? Why is a phone that's just functional, why can't it look good? And as much as Steve Jobs had his fault, he brought design, in my opinion, back to the forefront of our minds. And why is that relevant to modular? Well, you have a few things going on. While you had, transportation and kind of us figuring out how to transport and getting semi-trucks and all that stuff going on through the 30s, 40s, 50s, you had a lack of design. Well, when we had the transportation ready, then you needed the design to catch up to make something that was beautiful and wasn't this boxy looking, ugly mess. And so we kind of went through that period. And so I think that in the last 15 years, you really had architecture and design kind of come together. And you have firms now that have enough experience to take and make a beautiful building, right? That's a lot of people don't get. You look at, going back to what I'm sharing with you here, you look at these buildings that are modular and you would never know. But if we went 20 years ago, we weren't building that beautiful of a structure in modular. So I think that that's one of the challenges. It isn't that we couldn't do it 20 years ago, we could, but people looked at it and was like, that's ugly. I'm not going to pay money to build that. So the design had to kind of catch up with the functionality. And now that you kind of have that, now you can start to get the robotics, right? And so if you look at Tesla's a prime example. Tesla, is still barely profitable today. If it wasn't for government tax credits, probably would have gone out of business. But now take an industry in construction that's thousands of years old, very conservative as far as profitability, controlled kind of by your GCs and developers who are conservative mindsets. Who's taking the multi-billion-dollar risk to go in a period of 10 years, take it from here to here? Mm-hmm. Katerra tried that and they failed. And the reality is I don't think that you can go from, in a construction industry, I don't think you can go from here to here overnight. I think it's a slower process because of all the perceptions that have to change. So to answer your question, we are literally in the watershed moment, in my opinion, of modular and construction and kind of the reworking of all of the ways that we think. And you having me on here talking about this is proof of that, right? We are not going to be building the same in 10 or 15 years that we're building today. And I was convinced of that 7 years ago when I first discovered modular. And I didn't think it was the right time to build a factory. 4 years ago, I said now is the right time because I saw what was happening with labor and what we saw going on with modular, with Marriott building hotels out of modular and contracting a company to build a factory just to build their hotels. That's how sold they are on the concept. Right. So you had to have a few things happen, but we're at that point. And another thing that holds back modular, there's not enough factories. So if you're a builder developer, you can call around till you're blue in the face and you probably won't even get a call back, or you'll get something like, hey, yeah, we'll follow up with you when we have capacity. There is so much demand right now for modular that there isn't enough factories to produce it, right? And so that's why, I've talked to you about this before, right? That I'm looking for relationships more than customers. And people say, well, isn't that the same thing? It's not the same thing. If you come to me and say, Clint, I'd love to get 20 homes, I say, how often? How many times?
Right.
You say, well, just one time. I say, I'm probably not the right person. I'm looking for relationship. I want to, I have a $30 million factory running, and I need to know that the person I'm selling to is trustworthy and can get a project done, just like they need to know I'm trustworthy, you can get their product done. Typical GCs and subcontractors, they don't need all that. They don't have that much invested. They can pull out, go to another project. With the amount of investment I have, I got to know that you're a good bet for my factory, for my employees, for my family. So it's interesting. It's a little bit different model, right?
Yep. And that brings up kind of my next point in terms of how this is all paid for. Generally a investor will buy a piece of land, or a builder will buy a piece of land. They'll get a construction loan, and then they'll fund the project by buying materials and then paying their GCs to put those materials together. It's an ongoing borrow money, pay for the next leg of the project process. Is yours any different? Are they basically giving you one lump sum of money to build the entire home and you deliver it? Or is it still kind of like a draw schedule where they're ordering the materials, they're being sent to your factory, you're putting them together in the factory? How much of that, the way that you charge for this and the financials, differ from the way that homes are traditionally built on site?
It's another thing that's held back modular. And it's another reason that you can't adapt an industry from here to here overnight, because it has all these processes and people have these ways they think, and you're trying to educate and get people to understand there's different ways and processes, but it's the same result. So with financing, right, typically, we'll have someone give us a down payment to hold their place in the factory line, because we need to be booked out 8 to 12 months ideally in our factory line.
And that down payment, is it for the price of the full house that you're going to be building?
The down payment is small. It's like skin in the game. It goes into an escrow account. It's going to pay for your materials. But it's so we know you're not going to screw us and then say, I'm going to build it on site and we're going to end up having, 300 employees. We have to find a way to pay when your project was supposed to be in our factory.
So you're using your money to buy the materials. You're not touching the deposit. You're fronting the money to,
Let me walk you through this. There'll be this down payment to hold your spot in the factory line. When we get 4 to 6 months out, we'll usually require 30% payment. And that goes to buy whatever we count of the materials. It's not going to buy all the materials. It's going to buy all the long lead time things. And this goes to supply chain management, right? We have place to store. We have a lay down yard. We have a building. We can buy appliances. So people say, well, there's a 2 or 3 month lead time on appliances. No problem. Buy them. We can put them in our factory.
But you're buying the materials. You're buying the appliances. You don't necessarily have to have the client, your client, the builder or the investor, buying the materials separately. You've got those relationships on your side.
Absolutely. And generally we have larger buying power, right? Because our orders are generally larger and more consistent, right? When we buy from Georgia Pacific, they're used to us giving them consistent orders. So, sometimes I have some builders or GCs who are like, well, I really want to use this or that. That's no problem. You should definitely compare it to our price versus your price and the certainty of their delivery, right? We cannot have product not there to build because we build so fast, right? We build, 10,000 plus square feet a week, and we're talking finished square footage. So when we start framing, it takes us 2 weeks to go from starting a home to completing it. That home is done entirely in less than 2 weeks.
So it's interesting because it almost sounds like your solution would be very interesting for smaller, even regional home builders, because you have buying power to get better pricing because you just buy more materials. That value might dissipate the larger the home builder gets because, if you think about a larger home builder that might be on par with buying materials or the same amount of materials as you. So that's an interesting component. Like that's an interesting value proposition for smaller and regional home builders to use modular over the traditional. They come to you and they give a deposit, and then when you're a certain period of time out, they're giving a third of it, and you're buying materials, and then those materials come to the factory. Then you start to put together the home, and then you ask them for the other third, and you keep building the home inside the factory. It sounds very similar to the regular way of doing it, which is, construction draws. So they're paying you a certain amount, you're buying materials, putting together, and you keep going inside the factory. Is that the idea?
Yeah, it is. And so a lot of times, like I said, I'm an educator. I have to get involved with the banks and go over our construction draw process. And this was one thing that held the industry back, which is holding it back much less now. But 20 years ago, so since our process is different, how we build is different, right? We build inside out. We put the interior walls in first, then the exterior walls. We'll have your kitchen in before the exterior walls of that box are up. People say, well, how or why? Why do I want to carry cabinets through doorways, banging them up when I can put this wall up, and put your cabinets in?
Yeah, I'm almost thinking about it like almost like a sound stage. Like you're not outside, so you can build the things that makes most sense to build first. Which in case you put the walls last. You had mentioned your lender, like in a regular real estate transaction, the investor would have their skin in the game. They'd have their equity, their money, and they would go to a lender, and their lender would be lending them the rest of the money. So I'm confused when you say your lender. Wouldn't the client, either the builder or the investor, bring their money along with their debt to you, where you wouldn't be financing any of it on your own?
Correct. Right. Yeah, you're right. So there's two aspects, right? There's the portion you're talking about, which is their capital stack, their money and their equity. So they may have their land and they may have to put some additional cash in based on whatever their situation is with their lender. And so wherever the deposit comes from, whether it's them or their lender, depending on their situation, we get that deposit, holds place line. That usually comes from the developer. Because usually, right, in most deals, the land isn't all the equity. There's some cash infusion. So usually the land is part of their equity, and then the deposit to us is part of their equity. And then when it comes to the 30%, the third, the bank is covering most of that usually because their equity is already in, right? And so usually that's from the bank. And we work with the bank to figure out, hey, do you want to give it to us? Do you want it to go into an escrow account? Do you want it to go directly to the supplier? We don't really give a crap. We just want the materials bought. Whatever the bank's comfortable with, we don't care as long as the materials are bought and they're in our yards. When we start producing, those materials are there. And then we set up a draw schedule. We do this with the bank. We work through this with the bank, with the developer. But usually more us and the bank, because the developer doesn't care at that point. The capital stack's done. They just want the product built. So it's more with us and the bank. And the way we usually do is we like to get weekly draws. Why? Because we're talking about building 10,000 finished square feet a week minimum for your project. So at $100, do the math, right? That's $1 million a week. We're outlaying, and we want that at the end of the week.
So the way you're saying, if I'm building 10 houses that are 2,000 square feet, you could build 10 houses a week in your factory? Because it's funny, when we sell built-for-rent projects, a normal cadence of building homes is between 10 and 12 a month. So you're saying you can build homes 4 times faster than generally most home builders can build on site?
Easily.
Which means as all this horizontal construction is going on, as the infrastructure for the roads and the electric and the sewer are going in, you're in the factory building the house, right?
Yeah.
And I guess the next question becomes storage. Let's say you got 100 property subdivision. It's feasible you can build all 100 properties before even the first one goes up on the site. I'm assuming you don't have a massive warehouse facility. You can warehouse 100 houses, or do you? I guess is my next question.
Modular factories have been doing this for years. We didn't invent anything new here. We shrink wrap them.
And you're like, where do we send it? Where are you going to store it?
When we finish that unit, we'll usually put EPDM. So we'll put 7/8 OSB and EPDM on there. Right. So it has a roof. And then on top of that, we take and we shrink wrap it. All the factories do this. They can sit out there for months with that EPDM roof and the shrink wrapping on it. You might say, well, why do you shrink wrap it? Well, a lot of times the sidewalls could have insulation or whatever in them. So we shrink wrap the hell out of it so no water can get in. They're watertight. And this happens. If you go to any modular factory, they usually have 50 to 100 boxes sitting in their yard for a project. And this is the reason. Let's say your horizontal construction is going to take 4 months, and it's going to take us 2 months to build 100 homes for you. So you want those homes 4 weeks after your foundation's poured, because you want to give your foundation time to cure. So 4 weeks, it's going to take us 2 months. So we go back 4 weeks. It's when you pour your foundations. We have that 4 weeks to build them. And then we have the 4 weeks before that we need to start. So we need to start building your homes 4 weeks before you start pouring foundations.
And that way you could stage it out. You could time it out where like there's no in between time essentially.
There you go. And usually we like to get them done ahead of time so you're not waiting. This is how we guarantee delivery. We don't try to get them done just in time. We want to complete your project. We want your last box rolling off of our line a couple weeks before you need it. So they're all in there. So when you say send them, it's like, they're here. Let's send them. Go, 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 go. There's nothing left for us to build.
Yeah. Clint, why don't you tell our audience who your typical and target audience is? Who are the people that you're most looking to work with?
Our target audience and what we're really looking for is builders, developers, GCs, the private equity firms that are, institutional investors who have a track record and are continuing to grow and want to work with us for years to come. And we want to work with them.
Sounds good. Clint, this has been super interesting. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Appreciate it, man.
See ya. Thanks a lot for watching this episode of Inside SFR. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it.